I want you to imagine a scenario that kind of defies all physical logic. Just picture yourself buried alive, sealed inside a pitch black cave.
Oh man, the ultimate nightmare.
Right, and you are trapped in the middle of the driest, most barren desert imaginable. I mean, a place entirely devoid of moisture. And in that dark, dusty tomb, you take your final breath.
But the actual medical cause of death is what makes it so crazy.
Exactly, because you die by drowning in ocean water.
It just sounds like a type of paradox, right?
Yeah.
Like a complete impossibility. But that physiological contradiction is, well, it's exactly what happens in this dark, kind of forgotten pocket of the Dune universe.
Yeah, so today we are taking a deep dive into the year 10,191, straight onto the desert planet Arrakis. We're looking at a story called Whisper of Caladan Seas, and it just drops us into a total nightmare situation.
It really does. House Atreides has literally just uprooted their entire civilization from their lush, oceanic homeworld of Caladan.
Right, to govern this hostile, sandy wasteland of Arrakis. And, I mean, almost the second they unpack, they're just ambushed by their mortal enemies, the Harkonnens.
And, the broader politics of that war are obviously famous. But we are zooming in on one isolated squad of soldiers today.
Yeah, to really explore this intense narrative of survival.
Exactly. We're looking at the terrifying psychological shock of obsolete warfare, and ultimately the awe-inspiring power of the human mind to literally reshape physical reality when pushed to the absolute brink.
It's wild. So to understand how a group of elite soldiers ends up drowning in a desert cave, we have to look at the tactical subversion that put them there in the first place.
The sheer chaos of this Harkonnen assault is absolute. I mean, the Atreides soldiers are just jolted awake in the middle of the night.
And their invincible house shields, the massive energy barriers that are supposed to protect their cities from aerial bombardment, they are inexplicably down.
Which immediately signals a devastating level of treachery from within.
Yeah, and you have Commander Gurney Halleck, this burly, battle-hardened guy with that beet-colored inkvine scar on his face, just barking desperate orders. His men are scrambling into their black uniforms with the red Atreides hawk crest.
But the weaponry the Harkonnens choose to use for this attack, it's really a masterclass in breaking the expected rules of engagement. Because in the year 10,191, warfare is highly advanced.
Right, both sides have lasguns.
Yeah, which are incredibly powerful, continuous energy weapons. But instead of relying solely on advanced tech, the Harkonnens unleash a massive artillery and mortar bombardment.
They're firing huge, old-fashioned, explosive metal shells at the city.
And it's completely baffling to the Atreides troops.
I mean, using physical artillery in this era, it's like spending millions of dollars on state-of-the-art cybersecurity for your smart home, right? You install retinal scanners, motion sensors, all these encrypted firewalls.
Only for a burglar to just walk up and throw a heavy rock through your living room window.
Exactly. It completely bypasses all the sophisticated defenses just because it's so incredibly primitive.
And when that primitive rock crashes through the glass, all your sophisticated training suddenly becomes, well, a huge liability. The Atreides elite corps are trained to fight Sardaukar.
The Emperor's deadliest shock troops.
Right, so this means they're conditioned for high-tech, formalized, shield-to-shield combat. They are entirely unprepared for a blunt force, indiscriminate rain of falling explosive rocks.
It's the shock of the obsolete.
Exactly. It completely breaks their mental model of how war is supposed to work.
And that kind of system shock doesn't just, paralyze the commanders. It trickles all the way down to the grunts on the ground. It creates this devastating domino effect of panic.
Yeah, like with young Elto Vitt.
Right, Elto. He's a new recruit, and he feels entirely out of place among these seasoned, whipcord-strong elite troops.
His uncle, Sergeant Hovit, is actually the supply sergeant who pulled strings to get Elto into the Corps.
So Elto is already dealing with massive imposter syndrome, and in the middle of this street battle, his detachment is sent to secure a defensive position up in the mountain caves of the shield wall.
And when they get up there, Elto looks down and just sees these massive Harkonnen artillery guns erasing lines of fleeing civilians.
It's horrible. So in this moment of impulsive, desperate bravery, Elto decides to act.
He takes his high-tech lasgun, a weapon he barely knows how to operate properly, honestly.
Right, and he fires a continuous beam of energy directly at the primitive artillery shells loaded in the enemy cannons below.
The heat from the lasgun detonates those old-fashioned explosives, and the cannon just blows up in a massive fireball.
And for a split second, Elto thinks he's a hero. But then a second artillery gun pivots and fires a shell directly into the cliff face right above Elto's cave entrance.
And the tragic irony here is just profound.
Yeah.
Elto's one moment of effective combat, his one successful attempt to protect his unit, it triggers a catastrophic avalanche.
Tons of rock shower down, completely sealing Elto, his uncle Hovit, and their entire squad behind meters of solid, impassable stone.
The very act of fighting back is exactly what traps them in a tomb.
So instantly, the external war raging outside the cave turns into a terrifying psychological pressure cooker inside. I mean, just put yourself in that space for a second.
It's suffocating.
You have 3 to 4 meters of solid rock pressing in from every side. The air tastes like chalk and rock dust. They're huddled in the dark to conserve the power packs on their glow globes.
And Elto is severely injured from the blast, too.
Right, he's feeling this broken glass agony in his lungs, tasting his own blood and just absolute dryness.
The claustrophobia hits immediately, but the real psychological torture comes just a few moments later. The unit's battlefield engineer, this muscular guy named Fultz.
Yeah, Fultz.
He uses a jury-rigged depth scanner to measure the rockfall. And the scanner reveals they are only 3 to 4 meters away from a massive military supply cache.
Oh man, food, medical supplies, and most importantly, water.
Exactly. It's right there on the other side of the wall. But the rock is so dangerously unstable, making digging completely impossible.
It's like the classic myth of Tantalus. Knowing that salvation is literally inches beyond your grasp but completely inaccessible, I feel like that breaks the human spirit so much faster than just being stranded in the middle of nowhere.
It really weaponizes their hope against them. But they do try one last desperate measure to bridge that gap.
The bats, right.
Yeah, the unit's signalman, Skovich, carries these things called distrans bats. They're engineered creatures whose nervous systems can be physically imprinted with voice messages.
Wow, okay.
So Skovich records a distress call into the bats and releases them, hoping their small size will let them navigate the tiny winding fissures in the stone and reach the outside world.
So the bats just flutter up into the dark cracks, and the men sit in silence and wait. But hours later, the bats return, squeaking in confusion, and they just land back on the ceiling.
Even these tiny creatures cannot find a physical exit.
And when those bats return, the very last shred of hope just evaporates. We see a gunner named Deegan completely lose his mind.
Yeah, he rushes the wall, literally clawing at the solid stone with his bare hands until his fingernails tear.
He leaves bloody, smeared patterns on the rock. And he's screaming that the Duke made a mistake bringing them here, lamenting that they are water people from Caladan and they were never meant for this barren wasteland.
This total breakdown.
But wait, I have a hard time buying this reaction, honestly. These are the Atreides elite corps. These are hand-picked, heavily conditioned combat veterans.
Right.
Are you really telling me a group of hardened commandos completely lost their minds just because they, missed the beach? That feels like a stretch for elite military personnel.
I get that. It sounds like an overreaction until you look at the biology of the human-environment connection.
Yeah?
This goes far beyond simple homesickness.
Okay, how so?
Think about the physiological reality of seasonal affective disorder, where a lack of sunlight chemically alters a person's brain chemistry, inducing severe depression. Now magnify that ecological shock to a planetary scale. These men are deeply biologically tied to an oceanic ecosystem. Their circadian rhythms, their cultural identity, their physical comfort, it is all rooted in moisture, atmospheric pressure, tides, and rain.
So Arrakis isn't just a sandy backdrop to them.
Exactly. The absolute dryness, the dust choking their lungs, the sensory deprivation of the cave. It is an active, hostile environment that's violently stripping away their core physiological identity.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the physical exit is sealed, the oxygen is dwindling, and their psychological defenses are completely shattered. At this point, the mind becomes the only possible escape route.
And this brings us to the hidden identity of Elto's uncle, Sergeant Hovit.
Right, because he isn't just a gregarious supply sergeant. He is a master jongleur.
The jongleurs are such a fascinating piece of this universe's lore. Hailing from the planet Jongleur, they were historically the premier troubadours of the Imperium.
But they didn't just tell stories, did they?
No, they spun narratives so immersive they were akin to deadly spiderwebs. They would travel between royal houses entertaining the elites, but eventually they were discovered using their art as double agents in interhouse feuds.
Oh, wow. So they were disgraced and shunned.
Yeah, their highly advanced planet fell into ruin, eventually replaced by hollows and digital Shigawire recorders.
But the skills of the jongleur didn't just disappear, they went underground. The natives of their home world literally suspected them of actual sorcery.
To understand how a story can do what we're about to see, we have to look at the mechanics of it. A master jongleur uses extremely advanced neurolinguistic programming combined with enhanced memorization techniques.
So it's definitely not just a bedtime story.
Not at all. It is a highly weaponized form of nostalgia designed to bypass the frontal lobe and directly trigger the brain's sensory cortex.
It's so potent that it's practically forbidden. Like back on Caladan, when Hovit would practice his storytelling with his family, he forced himself to take breaks.
Yeah, he would strictly warn his listeners, do not believe this too deeply or you will lose your mind.
Because the danger is that the listener's consciousness can become permanently trapped in the narrative construct.
Exactly. And here we are in this suffocating cave. Deegan is bleeding against the wall, Elto is dying from crushed lungs, and Elto begs his uncle, take me back to Caladan. Make me think I'm there.
Which, I mean, raises a deeply uncomfortable situation. By unleashing this hypnotic power on a group of dying, oxygen-deprived men, is Hovit offering merciful palliative care? Or is he performing like a non-consensual mental hijacking of his entire squad?
It's a tough call.
Yeah.
From a strict clinical perspective, you could argue it's a violation of consent because the men don't fully comprehend the fatal permanence of the trance they're entering.
Right.
Initially, Hovit is terrified to do it. He refuses. But when those distrans bats return, confirming there's zero chance of rescue, his ethical framework completely shifts.
He issues a gruff warning that the story is dangerous, but the soldiers just laugh it off.
They're dead men breathing stale air. From Ho's perspective, he isn't hijacking their minds. He's constructing the only exit door left in the universe. He is using his forbidden art to build a psychological bridge out of hell.
That's incredibly heavy. So Hovit takes a deep breath to center his uncanny skill, drops his warnings, and fully commits to the illusion.
And he doesn't just describe Caladan. He uses his voice to layer in incredibly specific, tactile sensory cues.
Like talking about sailing in wingboats over the reefs, he describes playing tri-chess, noting that the pieces were carved from the translucent ivory tusks of South Caladan walruses.
Played on boards made of flat pearls and abalone shells.
Yeah. He talks about the sticky juice of sweet paradigm melons fresh out of the water, and sightings of elecrans, which are these rare, living electrical storms that dance on the dark seas.
The mechanics of how he delivers this are so crucial. Hull weaves subliminal triggers beneath the words. He commands the brain's olfactory nerves to fire, telling them to smell the salt water.
To smell the harsh iodine of drying seaweed.
Right. He manipulates their auditory processing, telling them to hear the throbbing songs of unseen mermans hiding in a fog bank.
And it works. The men begin to collectively hallucinate. The parched, dusty reality of the cave just completely fades from their perception.
Elto physically feels the loving touch of a sea breeze on his cheek. He feels the spring rain on his face, the cold ocean waves lapping at his boots.
It reminds me of putting on a virtual reality headset with a simulation so profoundly convincing that your brain physically reacts to it.
Oh, like phantom touch.
Yeah, exactly. You know how people in VR sometimes experience phantom touch when a virtual object brushes against them, and their brain supplies the physical sensation even though nothing is there?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
This is that phenomenon pushed to a fatal, permanent extreme. Their brains are fully processing the sensory inputs of an ocean that absolutely does not exist.
And it escalates from an individual hallucination into a mass psychogenic event, what psychologists call a shared delusion, or folie à plusieurs. As Hovit speaks, the men's voices literally begin to merge. Elto says he remembers splashing in the water, and the other soldiers murmur reverently in unison, "We remember."
They aren't just listening to a story anymore. Their collective consciousness has relocated.
The contrast between the vivid internal hallucination and their grim external reality is really chilling. While Ho is spinning this oceanic paradise, the physical reality of the cave is shutting down.
Yeah, the oxygen is rapidly running out. The air becomes so depleted that those two distrans bats clinging to the ceiling simply sway and drop dead to the stone floor.
And the battery on the last glow globe finally dies, plunging them into absolute pitch-black darkness.
But the men don't notice the dark or the suffocating air at all. They are completely anesthetized by the sea.
As Elto takes his final breaths, barely able to speak through his crushed chest, he whispers, "I'm going into the water. I'm diving. I'm going deeper.
The text tells us that the whisper of Caladan Seas became a roar in their minds. And right at that moment of death, the narrative snaps us violently out of the illusion, back to the objective physical reality of Arrakis.
It's a huge tonal shift.
It really is. We suddenly meet a group of Fremen scavengers. These are the native desert dwellers of Arrakis, sneaking through the rubble in the dead of night, completely wrapped in their moisture-preserving still suits.
And I do not care about the politics of the Harkonnen takeover or the Atreides defeat.
No, to them, these foreign soldiers are just foolish interlopers. The Fremen are only there for one reason: to harvest water.
They plan to feed the dead bodies into their death stills to extract the body's moisture, earning wealth for their siege.
It's a purely transactional view of human life, but it's born out of the extreme scarcity of the desert ecosystem.
Right. So the Fremen use their tools to carefully dig through the rubble, knowing exactly where the avalanche occurred.
And they finally break through the rock and step into the enclosure, and the scene they find is incredibly eerie. It's described as a clammy stone coffin.
Yeah, instead of the bone-dry, dusty air you'd expect in a sealed desert cave, the space smells strongly of mildew and damp rot.
And the physical state of the Atreides soldiers is deeply unsettling to the Fremen. When people die of asphyxiation or crush injuries, their faces are usually twisted in horror or agony.
But these soldiers' dead eyes are open wide, staring upward with total contentment.
As if they had all shared a profound religious transcendence.
And then comes the impossible twist.
Yeah, the Fremen leader reaches down and grabs one of the bodies to move it. When he rolls the soldier over, a gush of water spews out of the dead man's mouth.
The Fremen leader actually tastes it, and it's salt water.
The scavengers are totally freaked out, obviously. They quickly cut open a few of the soldiers to inspect them, and they discover that the lungs of every single dead man in that cave are entirely filled with ocean water.
Which just completely shatters the physical laws of the planet. I mean, there is no water anywhere near that cave, let alone ocean water.
This detail completely turns the story on its head. It transforms a tragic, claustrophobic military defeat into a bizarre, transcendent victory.
They didn't just mentally escape.
No, they literally defeated the desert by drowning in it. But, I mean, how is that scientifically possible, even in a sci-fi context? How does a hallucination put physical salt water into a man's lungs?
It pushes the concept of the mind-body connection to its absolute theoretical limit.
Like the placebo effect.
Exactly.
Hmm.
We know about the placebo effect, where the brain's belief in a cure can trigger real biological healing. But we also know about the nocebo effect, where the brain's expectation of harm can cause genuine physical symptoms.
Right, like people breaking out in rashes when told they touched poison ivy, even if the plant was actually totally harmless.
Precisely. The master jongleur's illusion was so flawless, and the men's desperate belief in it was so total, that it bridged the gap between consciousness and physical reality.
Their brains were so entirely convinced they were drowning in the oceans of Caladan that their bodies manifested the physiological reality of drowning.
Perhaps rapidly pulling the trace moisture from their own cellular structures to fill their lungs. It suggests that absolute belief isn't just a mental state. It is a physiological force capable of overriding the material world.
It is absolutely staggering. We have gone on quite a journey today. We started with the sheer chaos of a high-tech military force paralyzed by the shock of obsolete artillery.
We felt the suffocating, claustrophobic despair of an elite squad trapped behind solid rock, agonizingly close to their own supplies.
And finally, we witnessed the forbidden storytelling of a master jongleur whose narrative was so powerful it allowed his men to mentally and physically escape a desert tomb by drowning in an imagined sea.
It serves as a profound examination of the narratives we tell ourselves to survive. The human mind, when cornered and pushed to the absolute brink, will construct whatever reality is necessary to protect itself.
And sometimes that constructed reality proves to be stronger than the physical walls of a cave. Imagine being buried in the driest place in the universe, yet finding a way to sink into the ocean.
It's wild to think about.
It really leaves you with a lingering, slightly unsettling question to mull over as you go about your day. If a story, told with enough conviction and desperate need, can literally fill a man's lungs with ocean water in the middle of a barren desert, what physical realities in your own life are being shaped right now by the stories you accept as absolute truth?